Is my mic on? Okay. So I would like to really be here as an advocate for open. And a company I co-founded with Tim O'Reilly Media has been an advocate for the open internet, the open web, open source. And I think I'd like to share some observations about that, because I think if we're going to create an open education system, we've got to learn from that kind of open. Open gets used in lots of ways. And sometimes we might even think it's open, but it's not. Open is a battle, it's a fight. It's against closed. And there's a lot of closed here that we're trying to fight against. So I would like to see open education be as open as the internet, as open as the web, and as open as open source. But we almost take those things for granted today. We didn't see them emerge, but we were there, we were following it, we were participating. You know, there were groups about this size called the Internet Engineering Task Force that got together to work on how the internet can be put together. Interesting thing is people didn't show up with organizations on their badges. They were there as individuals. And they got together, and the best ideas literally were the ones, not just ideas, but the phrase that they used was rough consensus and running code. You had to show up with an idea of what you were doing, but you had to show that it worked. So the internet we have is not the only possible global network that could have existed. There were many companies that wanted to build and deploy this magnificent idea of a network, but they wanted themselves at the center of it. You know, they wanted to be the control point. And when they realized that that wasn't going to happen, they formed alliances. And they started to work on standards for a global network. And they spent millions of dollars on it. And what wins in the end is literally some DARPA-funded project that comes out of universities and people have no vision of where it's going, but people are able to attach to that network easily. And nobody owns it. And that is a key thing. When we hear about standardization, we should flee from it. It's not a good thing. The open web. The web comes about, again, outsiders. A guy from Switzerland who's English and lives in France. He goes to the Hypertext conference, which in 1991 was the only place academically where you could talk about something like this, of connecting documents and that. He submits a paper and they reject it. And I met him doing a little poster session, in San Antonio. And people that were used to other systems and looking at it, they dismissed the web. They didn't think it was important. It didn't have a big standard behind it. It had little tiny things. And you know what really upset computer scientists? Links could break. Tim designed a system in which URLs might resolve to nothing. Our 404 errors that we get today? He said, well, that's reasonable. That's the way the world works. When I write a letter and I might send it to someone, that person's moved. I might get that letter back. Computer scientists want a central system where every address was registered and everything resolved, because that was, in their view, failure. And to some degree, the open web exists on this very lightweight infrastructure, and it propagates that way. Open source. O'Reilly organized one of the first meeting was an open source summit. We got people that were calling it free software, and a group of us believed that it ought to be called open. And again, Richard Stallman's characterization of free was free not as in free beer, but free as in freedom. But we felt like a group of us that open meant a lot more than just free. Jim made that comment earlier. And there's a couple of things here. Open source would not have come about by collaborating with Microsoft, right? They were the dominant, at least in operating system, the dominant player there. You would not have got them to participate in a process to create open source. It undermined their business. And you know, the interesting thing is open source developers largely weren't that interested in undermining their business. They simply wanted access to technology that they could use, and they didn't want someone like Microsoft saying, well, we'll open this part, you know, or we'll do a little bit here to make this better. They wanted something where they could get in and see all the code and do something with it. I think that's a really important thing here, is open can't be partially open. It has to be radically open. And I think, again, you know, the same in databases. Oracle owns databases, and people say, well, you know, initially, you know, the benefits of open source was that it opened up very small niches for developers to work in that, you know, these large companies didn't pay attention to. Someone wanted to create a content management system or something, and you know, no one else thought that was important. But the developers had the code, and they could work it together. I mean, the real big open source project that affects this is Apache, and it was a group of developers that get together who want to patch the web server out of NCSA. They simply say, this is all a tool that we're all using in common. We don't really sell servers. But Microsoft was selling servers. Other people were. They just wanted this to be available for free. And again, the web grows because anybody could create a server, and anybody could create content on that server. But I think there's one other point about open source that I think is relevant here, and it kind of echoes a little bit Louise's comment. You know, open source was really like a grad school, a laboratory, an apprenticeship program. Developers could join projects and do work that was visible to other people. And I think that is almost an unrecognized feature of open source, is that you could see who was doing the work. It wasn't just a brand name on the label of that software. You could go to a site and look up who did it. And guess what? Employers started doing that. They say, hey, we're using that software in a business. Who's on that team? Who are some of the people that know that software really, really well? So those are, I think, lessons around an open internet, an open web, and open source. The thing that I'm involved with today in Make magazine is a kind of maker movement. And it's almost applying open source principle to physical things. How do, literally, there's working on an open source definition for hardware. And people might share designs and specifications, and they might even commercialize it themselves and make a version of it, but they're still open sourcing what's behind that. And I think it's kind of the cutting edge of open today. Let's see. So I want to kind of talk about a little bit about when I'm thinking about OER. That today, you know, as I see it, it's kind of in a Web 1.0 world. And I'd like to see it move to a 2.0 world. And you know, we were involved, Tim and I, in creating that idea. And the simplest version of it, you know, was Web 1.0 is about information, and Web 2.0 is about participation. And it's really about how do you construct platforms, an architecture for that participation. And I came across, you know, these ideas are so, they're baked into the design. Here's J.C.R. Licklider, one of the thinkers about the internet, long before it's even called the internet. He says this universal network is more than a service for the transmission of data, but it's also a tool whose value came from the generation of new information through interactions with its users. I mean, that's the opportunity we have here. It's just to put content online. I'm a publisher. I do that. I know it. But it's actually seeing how the communities interact with it and direct it and take charge of it. And in fact, the moment we're in is that all the tools that are available to us as professionals, whether in publishing or education, are also available to the students. The same tool set. And they can do what we do. Maybe not with the same expertise. It doesn't matter. Facebook is what they're using, and we're using it to promote our programs. So to get them to become productive users of tools and to generate and produce this is really the opportunity. So the way I'd like to frame it is we've been focusing a little bit on how these tools might be used by institutions and particular professors and putting up open courseware. What I'd like to see is how are students using these tools? And what they can use these tools to do is to create a whole new body of evidence of learning, a body of evidence of their own capabilities. And it's not just about, hey, this is useful for my college application. It's actually useful in the community. It shows people what they care about and who they are. We had a program, I just blogged on O'Reilly Radar, but we have an Ignite program, and it's 5-minute talks. And 20 slides, they go automatically. And I happened to do one at a Petaluma High School up north of here. And I'd never done one at a high school, and I thought this is a novel idea. What was so exciting, though, it wasn't just me and some others from the community. Students were presenting at that Ignite. And they gave the most compelling talks. And I thought, and again, it looked like, there was popcorn, there's families, it could have been a PTA meeting or some other kind of school event, but it brought the community together around ideas. And to see what these students do, and I went up to this young woman who gave a great talk, and I said, that 5-minute video should be your college application. It tells me everything I want to know about you, who you are, what you care about, and what your passion is. So we have these tools available. And the interesting thing is, even if the school systems aren't using it, employers are. A story I saw in the New York Times about 2 weeks ago, University of Texas coach Mac Brown hired an offensive coordinator and a defensive coordinator from kind of unusual places. One was like Boise State. These are not like big schools, football's normal powers. But he said in the article, he said, I was able to go on YouTube and watch these coaches speak to students, interact with students. He said, I knew all kinds of things about them before I ever met them. And I think that's the kind of world we live in. And we actually need education to create the opportunities for this evidence making. And then I think MAKE is a great example of that. Build a project. It demonstrates what you do. There's a physical result at the end. But your story about that result, the story of the process, how you got there, what you were thinking along the way, why you did it that way, that's also evidence of learning. So for me, the most important open educational resources are the students themselves. Thank you.